Substances dealers of Reddit, have you ever called CPS on a client? So I'm only posting because I have been clean and sober for 3.5 years now. And anything I say I have already been convicted for, and I've officially finished all of my legal issues. I have never officially called child and family services, but I had this one mother who used to constantly call me for Met, and I had never been to her house before. I was a bit of a sketch bag and didn't trust anybody, but after a few months I built a relationship with her where I felt at ease going to her house. When I went to go drop some off, it was child tax day. I never knew she was a mother. Normally not an issue for me, I could not care less. I walked into the house and the smell was unbelievable. Cigarettes, sweat, crap, and piss. There was broken glass on the floor, 12-inch burn circles on the floor, poop on the floors. The TV was smashed. The bathroom door was literally torn off and in the hallway. I had seen a little toddler that was walking around with no diaper on. He had his own poop all over him. He was so malnourished, he was gray. The mother came to give me her money, and I took the bag of Met. I had put it in my pocket, and I told her to buy some diapers for her kid. I told her that she would have to find her Met somewhere else, and walked away. A good friend of mine who had always tried to help me out was a social worker, and I told her who she was and where she lived, and gave her some details so she could make a final decision. I'll always remember that kid. The last I heard, he had been taken away, and the mother was in jail. I wish him the best of luck in this cruel world. Story 2. When I was selling to her, a lady shook her crying baby in front of me. I wigged out, took the baby, dumped $500 worth of substances, and called 911 from my car. She didn't put up a fight until the cops came to arrest her. She tried to sue me for kidnapping. Definitely not the best strategy for me. I was 18 and addicted pretty bad. But when the baby saw a doctor under state care, he was covered in bruises and 2 broken ribs. I'm convinced she would beat him. He's 10 now and happy and thriving. The whole experience and legal battle when she tried to have me charged with kidnapping is how I got sober. Story 3. Yes. Back when I was younger, maybe 17, I got my first job at Domino's Pizza. One of my managers was a really scummy 24-year-old guy that looked like a troll, had astoundingly bad hygiene, and also a crafty attitude, but sold good weed and bought me cigarettes. This was my first experience having older friends able to get me good stuff on demand like that. One day, he hooked me up with a friend of his that was selling mushrooms, so I met with that guy and bought substances, and then walked to my manager's house to sell him some, and also get some weed. So turns out him and his similarly aged sister, who has a baby, both live in makeshift bedsheet bedrooms in the basement of the tiny house. They smoked inside, windows closed, cats everywhere, bugs everywhere, weird, gross, sour smells coming from all areas. Everything gross. Their mom was home, but she was senile and addicted to painkillers, as well as the sister. So we did the trade downstairs, and when I go back upstairs, I go to the kitchen to throw some stuff away, and I see the baby in a high chair, eating a pack of cigarettes. He's just sitting there tearing them open and putting in his mouth and spitting it out. I ran downstairs and told the sister, and she just started yelling, "Mom, Mom, get the baby," a couple times lazily, then gives up and goes back to just sitting there. It was surreal. I hadn't ever experienced such neglect and disgust from people. I left and waited 2 days to call CPS because I didn't want my manager to know it was me who called. I know the kids got taken away and she went to live with a different family member, or at least that's what I was told. Story 4. I pulled up to this woman's house. I was 19 at the time. She was a regular and often asked if I had any powder. I was strictly a substances dealer. When I walked into her house, she had 2 babies, twins. Female dealer here. When I asked to use the bathroom, she said she didn't have running water due to money issues. There was a 5-gallon bucket in the bathroom to pee and poop in. This bucket was extremely full, not to mention the overflowing trash cans and tied-off trash bags in the living room. I couldn't believe how gross her house was. I panicked. I called CPS and told them I was a family friend. I drove my car down the road a little and waited for the cops to show up. I watched them pull the woman out to the house in cuffs. She turned out to have substances in her house. I still wonder about those twins today. Story 5. I used to sell weed around 20 years back, and I had a regular that would come to see me like clockwork every weekend. He seemed like an okay guy, excluding the substances, of course, but I can't really criticize here because I was a dealer, and after a while, his pickups turned into 5-minute chats and then to 30-minute stays. During a convoy, he let slip that he had a son, a toddler, and that he looked after him every weekend, and that when he was at my joint picking up his kid was in the car, the kid was in the back seat. He had a high-ace minivan windowless the whole time. And not only that, but because he didn't want to share his single bed with his kid and risk getting it urinated in, he made his kid sleep in the van outside. But it's okay, because it was locked and parked in the backyard, so the kid was safe. As soon as he let it slip, he was done as a customer. I told him to GTFO and never come back on the threat of a severe beating. He threatened to rat me to the cops. I told him that my suppliers saw me as a decent source of income and wouldn't take it very well. He left. It rocked me so hard I felt almost concussed. I honestly couldn't process how sterile and casual he was about it all. And I knew I had to tell CPS. So I called anonymously and said I lived on his street and could hear the kid crying from the van at night every weekend, and that I had seen him incoherent and smelling of weed during the day. I never saw him again, and I don't know what happened to either him or his son, but it has stuck with me all this time, and I feel responsible for his actions in part because he did these things in pursuit of his substances. I eventually stopped dealing and got my crap together and the way I felt about this. And the realization that my actions affected people far further from me than I thought was a huge part of it. Nothing changes the fact that I contributed to that child's neglect and abuse, though. Willingly or not, it makes no difference. And it's only one of the crafty, ugly things I've done that I have to live with. Story 6. Not sure if this counts, but in the late 1990s, I used to sell substances part-time while I was in college. One of my regular customers turned his sister on to me. She called for a delivery. No big deal. I went there one time. She had 3 little kids, like a couple toddlers and an infant. Her house was full of cockroaches. I was disgusted. I called CPS, not because of the substances and babies, but because of how damn filthy that house was. It caused a lot of problems for her and her boyfriend. They were in the system for a long time. Not sure how it all turned out, but damn that woman. Story 7. A friend of my girlfriend introduced us to her neighbors who were like 50, 60-year-old hippies that looked like a bad acid trip, but bought weed regularly for full price. Couple months down the road, they start being more friendly with my girlfriend and I, and start talking more when we'd go drop off the crap. The topic began with her telling us how she has custody of her daughter's oldest born because her daughter was sitting time at a women's prison. Backstory on the kid: looks 15, but clearly has the mind capacity of a 6 or 7-year-old. Not sure what was wrong with her specifically, but you could tell there were issues. Near the end of the conversation about her daughter, she brought up the fact that her granddaughter was prescribed Adderall 30Xer, and whenever they got her prescription, they'd dump all the little beads into a bowl to use whenever they couldn't find Met or whatever they needed, and instead fill the Adderall with Benadryl to make the kids sleep. Till this day, I'll never forget the emotions I felt after getting out of there and sitting in my car. My hands were shaking so bad it was hard to Google information about CPS, much less type information in. I felt goosebumps in every pore of my scalp. As a father of 2, I never knew such evil existed. Obviously in movies and crap, but never experienced something firsthand like that. Story 8. My husband did years ago. He had a client who used weed. The lady had 2 children and started just leaving them to do whatever for days. The kids were dirty, sick, and starving. So we had to call CPS and the police. It was scary what was going on, and those kids needed help. Story 9. I used to deal way back when I was a hot mess in an extremely abusive relationship. I called CPS on not only one person, but 6. The one that sticks with me most, though. Not only because of the severity, but because I called twice, was this couple who used to pick up from me at a laundromat, and we ended up seeing each other often enough. I felt okay to go to their place. I was so damn floored when I stepped through that door. I kid you not. They had taken up all the carpeting in the house and had torn down the walls to get at the copper wiring and pipes. They had no electricity or running water. There was nothing in that house except for some sleeping bags in what used to be the living room. And then I noticed a nest of blankets with bright blue eyes peering at me over the pile, and realized that there was a toddler and a small child, no more than 5. Until this point, I had never seen nor heard them talk about having kids. The poor kids were filthy and obviously malnourished. The house stunk of Met so badly I gagged. I couldn't believe it. I guess the look of shock was super apparent on my face because the dad said they were squatting and introduced me to their kids. I made some small talk and then left. The phone was ringing for CPS before I closed my car door. I gave them the address and let them know the conditions of the home, and they were squatting with 2 small children. Gave the names of the parents as I knew them and the names of the kids. They ended up going to jail for the squatting, and the kids went to live with a relative. They ended up contacting me back to sell to them after they were bailed out of jail, and I never responded. However, the guy I was with at the time ended up selling to them, and they were living in a field in a tent with the kids. I got into a huge fight with my boyfriend over it and was so disgusted he still sold to them. I ended up calling CPS on them again. From what I heard from other people that knew them, the kids were taken permanently after that, and about a year later, the mom ended up going to prison for attempted murder, and the dad went to prison for check fraud some weeks after that. Story 10. This was a long time ago, and I've since gotten clean and started my own family, but there was a girl I knew who was homeless with her newborn son. On Easter weekend, I was walking on this trail to go meet with some people to sell them a weed. It started raining, and that, of course, made me mad. There are these bridges that cross over the top of the trail, and lots of kids gather and smoke or get spun under the bridges. And that's where I found her. She was passed out drunk with some random guy under the bridge while her newborn baby sat strapped in his car seat in the rain. He wasn't under the bridge. He was crying, and he looked dirty. I didn't have any children at this point, but I panicked seeing the little guy. I grabbed him, dropped all the crap I was supposed to be selling, and walked off the trail and up the couple blocks to the police station. I told them what happened and where I'd found him. CPS took him, and he ended up getting adopted. Story 11. This is a sad story, but I'll tell it anyways because it was the past. There have been so many stories, but this one takes the cake. It's the reason I stopped selling and turned my life around. I must have been 16 or 17 at the time. I was in high school, also had a part-time job at Dairy Queen and on top school and regular job. I was selling substances. I was also selling weed and cigarettes at school. This story involves a substances user. At the time of this incident, I've already been selling hard for about 1 or 2 years. Profit was pretty good, I'd say around $300 per day on average, which was great for my age. But I spent money as fast as it came. I was young and I was dumb. I would use some addict's house to sell out of. I guess the cops would call these things projects. I'd be supplying the addict a cheaper price for product so that I could use their house to sell out of. They would also refer a lot of other people to buy from me, and they would help sell for me in return for product. So the incident is in this addict's house. He, about 50-year-old man, has a girlfriend or partner or something like that. The girlfriend had a little boy, maybe the age of 3, 4, 5. At the time, I didn't know how to tell how old a kid was. I didn't ask either because I was ashamed of myself for not preventing his mother from using. This kid, though, I felt like he was my little brother in some way. I would cook for him when he was hungry and his mom was always too messed up to do anything. One day, I go to work at the shack. It was a regular day. I get into the house, get my products ready, weigh out the stuff, and bag them up. Knock on the bedroom door of the guy, homeowner. I see him sleeping. His girlfriend is also on the couch sleeping because she is always high and messed up. The kid is just sitting there watching TV. I make him some macaroni and cheese. Now I wake up the guy because I need an update on what products he's moved the day before. So I go in his room. I see his eyes were still open. White foam all over him like he's overdosed. He's been overdosed for too long, which means he's passed away. He was probably overdosed for at least 10 hours because I could smell it, and he was cold to the touch. His vomit was dried, and his eyes were dried. Now I'm in one of the biggest panics I've ever been in. As I'm trying to figure out what to do, I sit down with the kid and stay there until he finishes his mac and cheese, thinking about what I'm going to do next. His mom, sleeping behind me on the couch, is still alive, but has no idea what had happened. Or maybe she does. I don't know. I left the shack, drove about 2 blocks away, used the prepaid cell phone I have to call the police and report it, sat in my car until the police showed up. From that day on, I'm anti-hard substances. I still wonder about the little kid. He's probably 16 now without a mom. Every time I see the mac and cheese at the supermarket, I get this feeling in my gut. And for the guy that died, I know I didn't kill him. I've accepted that. But could he have lived longer if I was never in his life? His life story was pretty amazing. He did cool things when he was young. He got into substances when his mom passed away. He didn't have a dad, though. Story 12. I did many years ago. When I pushed, I did not deal in hard substances. While I was at this woman's house because she was not only a client, but also a girlfriend of one of my best friends. So I was there often enough to see him. I consistently found myself and anyone else at the house left alone with the child. It seemed if anyone showed up, she would sneak out. Come to find out she was doing met with the upstairs neighbors. And who knows what else. I hate to know who that child was ever left alone with. She had been an on-again, off-again addict, pills, med, etc. Many times, I witnessed that she would watch her toddler put cigarettes in her mouth from the ground, which I would take away from the baby, and she would laugh and say that it's not a big deal. I rode in her car a few times. I was a smoker at that time as well as her. I would get out of the car to light up, and she would tell me that I could smoke in the car, but I refused because of the child in the back seat. When I was around, I would try my best to kind of steer her away from the child when she wanted to have a cigarette. It's something very specific that began to steer me clear of any tobacco use. I had enough. I am the oldest of 9 kids, and I nannied for several families for over a decade aside from mothering my own siblings. I know that a child can handle a lot, but there are so many things that she was doing that kept ringing off the danger bells in my head. I knew that if that child got sick or even died because of her carelessness, I would feel directly responsible for not doing anything about it. If you see something, say something, especially when it involves a child. My goal was not to have her child taken from her, and she never did, but for someone with authority to keep tabs on the child. I could not stand to be around her anymore, and it is within my nature to take on a caretaker role. But that relationship I had with those people were seriously damaging my mental state. I had nothing but fear and sorrow for that little girl. I lost a best friend by doing this, but the kid was worth more than a friend who could not see what his woman doing right in front of him. Where they are now is even more sad, but I can't bring myself to dive into that. Story 13. I had a dealer who I thought was all right at first. Came on a little strong asking to play Destiny with me, as we both had PS4. Eventually, I started going around to his house for a joint before going home with my bag. This was fine at first, but gradually became a bit of a living hell. He started screaming at his kids. They must have been 3 and 6. For anything, for walking into the room, for playing in another room, for making a loud noise, for asking a question. Even when they want a hug, he's shouting at them, and even when he gave one, he told them to stop being stupid and stop crying. This abuse extended to his partner. She was half his size and thin. Not unhealthy thin, but thin. It was just verbal, but calling her an idiot, screaming at her in this low, angry tone he took with his kids, talking through his teeth, then exploding at the end of the sentence. She hated it, you could tell, but she put up with it because she didn't work and needed to support the kids who she loved. One day, he got so mad he held her against the wall and started beating her. I stood up and shouted, "What damn are you doing?" He caught himself and backed away. She slumped to the floor crying, and he tried a pathetic attempt at damage control, telling her he's sorry, but it's her fault, and telling me the same. I left there and then, never went back, called social services and gave them the address. I knew they had been before, but they won't have seen it happening. Not too long after the police were there arresting him for something, I assumed they saw the weed or something and called them, but I'm glad they did. Story 14. No, but I once told someone I was out of weed because I knew they were barely getting by and had kids. Like, there are better things you could be spending your money on, dude. Story 15. I'm not a dealer, but I called CPS on my sister. She smoked a lot of weed, not a huge deal. But one day, when I was picking them up to come to my house, she was on the floor smoking a bowl with him right next to her. She also told my husband there was met in the house. They also fought constantly, and I know it got physical. There was a time he threatened her and said, "If you weren't holding him, I'd beat the crap out of you." She always complained that he never slept, but the first night he was at my house, he fell asleep with no issue and did perfectly all week long. For the first 17 weeks of her pregnancy, she was high and told the doctors so it's frustrating that she got past that. She called me one day because they had been by the do a wellness check, so I went to pick the baby up, 8 months old. The house was ducking disgusting. I'd never seen anything like it. There were piles of trash bags filled with diapers and rotting food. Counters were covered. The floors when I sat down felt nasty. The baby was in only a diaper, normal for his age, but all of his clothes were dirty. She packed a bag for him to stay the night with me. His bag, clothes, and car seat were filled with cockroaches. My husband swears up and down he found bed bugs in the baby's car seat. We threw the car seat away and washed all of his clothes, and then went and bought him a new car seat, bought one for my house, and new one for her. We had the baby for a week, and CPS never showed back up, so she asked for him back. We didn't have any signed statements saying she gave us permission to take him, so we were worried if we said no, she'd try and get us for kidnapping, so we gave him back. We took her to Walmart to buy soap, her car seat, and meds. The next day, I called CPS and filed as a mandated reporter and told them everything I knew. It's been 3 weeks, and nothing has come out of it. It broke my heart to call, but I had to. It kills me knowing he's in that house, and I feel helpless. There's nothing else I can do. It's hard enough. My husband and I have our own 5-month-old baby, but I would take that little boy in a heartbeat because at least I know he'd be in a clean, safe house with people to take care of him. He doesn't deserve that. I've offered to help her get away from her boyfriend and even let her and the baby move in with us, but she refuses to leave him. I've asked her to let me keep the baby, but the longest we did was a week, and she demanded we gave him back. She doesn't work. Neither does the boyfriend. They live in government housing. The baby doesn't go to daycare, and she doesn't have health insurance as far as I know. I didn't know what else to do. I don't have too much knowledge other than my own experiences, and I have never dealt with something like this before. Neither has my husband. Story 16. Back in college, I went over to a single mother's house to drop off some substances. The kid was 3 years old. I walk in and notice it is extremely smoky, and I immediately have a hard time breathing. It smelled like rotten crap, trash, and cigarettes. I was there for about 3 minutes and went to use the bathroom, where I noticed fresh and dried crap on the toilet, and crap smeared all over the floors and up the walls. The crap was old and hardened, and dead bugs were in the corners of the bathroom and piled on top of the feces. But that isn't the only icing on the cake. Once I left the bathroom, I went back out to the living room area and saw a big ass rat run right across the floor. Looked like he came right out of Ratatouille, so I got out of the house and called CPS. Story 17. Throwaway. A mother wanted to buy 70 pills at once before a family trip. She had a 9-year-old in the car, called CPS on the mother. Never will I ever deal you in front of your kids. Damn. Drop them off. Story 18. So all I sell is weed, substances every now and then, but hate the clients, so just weed mostly. Was introduced to this girl that did the same thing. We would usually meet up and do business together. We are kind of around the same level. So sometimes I dropped off, sometimes I grabbed. I noticed she liked me, but kind of ignored it. Don't crap where you eat kind of crap. So times goes by, I find out she has kids that are now living with her in the house. Before they were at their dad's or somewhere, IDK didn't really care. So when I go over now, there are kids that really start to freak me out because I know it's weed, but still I don't feel they should be exposed to it. Ask her, hey, you want to meet up elsewhere or maybe come to my place? Says no. Her house is cool. Don't want to, but I'm a hole in money. So one day I show up, there are a crap ton of people around, 2 kids, 1915 playing video games, and like 3 guys and 2 girls just blazing like there is no tomorrow. Walk in nervous, because I don't like doing this with so many people around. Tell me it's cool. Notice a gun on the kitchen table, and here we go. To my surprise, everything goes fine. I'm about to leave, but ask her to talk to me outside. I tell her that I don't think she should be doing this around her kids, and if she does, maybe separate the kids in a different room. She tells me her kids have been around this all their lives, and they know how to act, and what not to touch, and what not to say. All I can think to myself is they are kids. They don't know crap but what we teach them. But whatever said my part, go back a couple times, see the youngest eat next to a gun and pound of weed. The oldest play videos next to a loaded gun. Everyone is smoking around them. Cigarettes, weed. The last straw is I go over and she is freaking out. Tell her to calm down. Said her kid ate one of her friend's edibles. The 5-year-old ate a cookie from a dispensary. I flip out, tell her to make him throw up, and let's take him to the hospital. She tells me no, they will take them from her. Ask her how damn she let this happen. Tells me she told her friend not to leave the cookie around, but they didn't listen. I helped them force this 5-year-old throw up, gave him orange juice because they said it helped the high come down. I left feeling like the worst kind of person there is. Normally, I don't think of myself as a bad person for selling weed. I mean, it's weed, but that day, to finish, I don't think she is a bad mom by that. I mean, I think she tries, but damn, how many mess-ups can you get? A month passed, and for some reason, I keep thinking of her kids to the point where I called CPS and told them what happened. I left the dealing part out for both of us and the guns. I really don't know if they would be better in child services or with her. I have family that used to be in homes, and damn, it's horrible. But what's worse, IDK, if I made the right choice. Story 19. I used to work at a chain restaurant about 4 years ago when I was around 21. There was a girl who started after me, call her Ashley. Ashley and I became best friends almost immediately. She was almost 10 years older than me at the time, but you could not tell, especially by the way she acted. But at 21, that didn't really much matter to me. We used to sneak nips into work, leave work to get drunk and try to sneak back, drank together out of work all the time. I knew she had a son that lived on the other side of the country that the father had custody of. She gave me some story about him lying, saying she was crazy and getting her child taken away, and nothing she did could get him back because her ex was manipulative. I bought it. Eventually, I found a better job, and that's about where our hanging out friendship ended. We always stayed in touch on FB. I got pregnant with my son around 23, and she had had 2 daughters in that time. So we agreed to get together and let each other meet our kids. I get to her house, and I see her walking up the street towards the house without her girls. The oldest was 2, I believe, waving to me. I get out with my son, and I ask her, where are your daughters? Oh, they're inside, she says. She left her baby daughters home alone, locked inside her bedroom, to walk a mile up the road to get cigs. Okay, ducked up. But I went inside anyway, kept my son in his car seat next to me on the couch. I can tell she's absolutely wasted already, but she pours herself 2 root beer Smirnoff nips into a cup, lets the daughters out of the room, and turns the TV on for them. The house was clean. That is what really threw me off. Like it looked like a great environment. She sits next to me on the couch and places her cup in the drink holder attached to the couch, and we just start catching up. About 10 minutes later, her daughter says she's hungry. Ashley yells, I just damn fed you. Watch your trolls. I was stunned. Then the little girl climbs up on the couch and grabs the cup of vodka. I say, no, honey, that's not for babies. But Ashley stops me and says, oh, it's fine. It will probably help her sleep better tonight, and lets her 2-year-old daughter take a sip of her drink. Now I'm about to leave, getting my shoes on, and her husband comes in, who I also knew from the same restaurant where he still worked at that time. He flips. He says, Ashley, have these girls eaten anything all day? She said yes. She gave them G's and cottage cheese. It was 7 p.m. She had given her daughters only a few G's and a bowl of cottage cheese all day. I was done. I called as soon as I got in my car. The father has custody of them now, I believe. He moved out of state somewhere. Thank God, because who knows how they would have ended up. Story 20. I was a user whose dealer called seeps on them. Many years ago, me and my partner were addicted to opiates. We had a steady dealer for a while, and eventually my partner was able to start selling after finding a new source. Well, our old dealer didn't like losing business, so he hit us where it would hurt the most. Our child. He had called and made up some bogus claims. When the police came, it was just me and the child, and the place was clean and had food. I got them to leave, but CPS showed up a couple hours later. The truth is, we were full-on functioning addicts who wanted freedom, but didn't know where to seek it. We followed the requests of CPS and the substances court exactly how they asked, and with no setbacks. Both have completed 3 months of residential and 3 months of outpatient treatment, and we're back home with our child in time for the holidays. We have been sobered since 2012. Not only did my child get a chance at a good life, our whole family did. Story 21. In my younger, stupider days, I dealt Met. Met is a strange force. We'll start there. I, of course, was also a huge addict and just trying to fuel my need. But there was this one house I would go to all the time. Mom and Dad just fully in the throes of addiction, but they had 2 sweet little girls there. During the time I was dealing, I got pregnant and stopped using, but I continued to deal because it's the only way I could save up money for my new baby. I ended up staying at this house, sleeping on the couch. Day in and day out, there were addicts coming in, fights breaking out, guns drawn. These 2 girls saw every bit of it. Eventually, the water was shut off. The gas was shut off. We were burning old furniture in the fireplace for heat. We were dumping water in the toilet to flush. This was normal for these girls. As I woke up from my induced stupor, I looked at these sweet girls, just victims in this hellhole. They bathed in water boiled over a fire and cooled enough to get in, heard their parents fight, heard worse at night. I started to have a routine with them, just to shelter them from their everyday horror. I did their homework with them, walked them to the park, made dinner for them, gave them baths and brushed their hair, put them to bed with a story. I remember staying up with them while they were sick, rubbing their backs as they threw up and cried. They screamed and cried as I moved out. My heart was broken. When I left that house, I thought of the life they would go back to. I had my own baby to take care of now, and I couldn't imagine her in that mess. I called CPS the first day in my new house. They were taken to their grandparents. I've never touched substances since those days. It was enough to show me that true evil exists. I think of those girls a lot. I hope their life is good. They kept me clean when it was hard to be. They showed me what I wanted to be like as a mom. They played a role in saving my life. Story 22. I guess I'm not a dealer per se. I happen to have a lot of connections, and as such, I middleman for folks fairly often. I have a fee for my services, obviously. Over a half ounce of weed is still a felony in my state, so I'm not picking up and delivering different substances for free. Also, my truck gets 10-ish miles to the gallon. I can't afford to drive around picking up and dropping off things of that nature without some compensation. I digress. Had a guy ask me if I could get substances. I hit up a few people, and we went through the dance of figuring out how much he wanted, how much I was going to get paid, where and when we were meeting, etc. So I went and got the guy a 10-strip for like $100. And he said he'd give me $125 to bring it to his house. Cool. Worth it. I show up, and he lets me in. Apartment is clean. He and his gaff are just chilling on the couch. I give him his tabs and get my money and ask him if I can use his bathroom. He says no prob and tells me where it is. I get in the bathroom and start doing my business. Nothing feels better than taking a huge piss after driving for forever, I swear. I wish they could put that feeling. Anyway, I'm finishing up and I hear a baby start crying. I didn't think a ton of it until I hear the dude start screaming at the baby to damn shut. The guy's GF starts screaming at him, and the baby just sounds terrified. Some of the most horrible sounds I've ever heard a child make. They scream for a second, and I'm debating on what to do when I hear a thud, and the GF starts screaming and crying. I decide I've got to do something, and I walk out and into the living room. He's standing over her with his fist balled up and screaming. She's clutching the left side of her face, crying, and the baby is still in some other room going damn nuts. I yell, "Hey, dude, what the duck?" at the guy, and he turns around and tells me I should go. He looked evil in that moment. I'd have beat him if I could have done so with no repercussions, but I thought better of it. So I left. I went outside, made an anonymous 911 call on my burner and said I was a concerned neighbor. Told them they needed to hurry because someone's life was in danger, gave them the address, and hung up. I pulled out of the complex and down the street a bit. Saw 2 cars with blue lights going, use their sirens to beep through the complex's gate. I have no idea what wound up happening, but I hope that girl and baby are okay. I'll never forget what I saw and heard that day. Damn people like that, dude. Story 23. In high school, I remember my friend put me on, and I started pushing part-time. There was a client who frequently picked up weed. She never gave us trouble and was always good on payment. She never asked for another substances, so I figured she probably just recreationally smoked and rolled at parties. I say no problem, swing by her place. Imagine my surprise when I get there, and she lets me in asking if I want a line. I politely refuse, taking a look around at how filthy the place was. There was cigarette burns and butts all over the place. Cockroaches ran rampant and needles strewn around the table. It was gross. I could barely breathe due to the smell of pee and feces. Double my surprise when a toddler just waddles in and the child looks dirty, malnourished, and hungry. I ask her whose kid that is, and she gives me a strange look saying, "That's hers." Turns out that she got kicked out by her mother for being pregnant and ended up living by herself. Later on, she tells me her mother had deep regrets for her dismissal and offered to take her back and help raise the baby. Unfortunately, for some odd reason, she refused her mother's assistance and foolishly decided to do things on her own. I have no clue how she afforded her substance habits. I remember telling a close friend of mine that was a few years older than me what happened, and she got in touch with CPS. Cops came, she was arrested, and the mother took custody of the child. I don't know what happened to her after that, but I hope she has sobered up and the child is okay. I'll never forget the last fleeting image I had of the woman. Right before I left, she was wrapping up her arm to inject herself with substances. Story 24. I lived that typical urban trope and grew up in a very bad neighborhood growing up. As teens, the substances game was just something that you were into, since everyone sold. But I was around 17, late 90s, and had been serving this one super fiend we all called Baby Twerk. She had a dude and she'd take his money, his car, and would trick on the side for cash and would literally page us every 3 hours around the clock. She was loyal, and we used to dime her to death. A rule we typically adhered to is that you never go to a head's house or domicile, as it's usually being watched by the P9, or you could be tried by your customer, which would force you to react. But this one particular Saturday night, my friend and I were sitting around playing in 64 and wanted to buy another rumble pack for the second controller when Baby Twerk hit us up. It was storming very bad outside, and she had her kids and couldn't walk to the gas station to meet. So we decided to do what we said we wouldn't and pulled up to her house. Mind you, this was back when pagers and payphones were a thing, so there was no "I'm here" texts. Anyway, we waited and waited, but she didn't come outside. As most know, most houses in the hood don't have gutters or porches, so when you pull up in a lightning storm, you either get absolutely dumped on or you go inside. Bruh, we walked in. And it was just as we pictured. She had 5 kids, the oldest being like 7, but there was trash, no carpet, and a hole in the middle of the kitchen floor from which you could see the crawl space. There were 2 other dudes we regularly served in the house also. We could hear the sound of someone a room away trying to smoke as her 4-year-old walked up to my friend and asked to goodbye. All of a sudden, old boy walked around the corner, and we hear the unmistakable sound of sizzling bass approaching. We had a thing about smelling, and being within 50 of it, as that was a selling charge of police happened to pull up. So we did a 180, ran out stumbling over each other, comically fast, and bounced. We had to wait until that Monday, but the look on her daughter's face stuck with us all weekend and ducked us up. It made us rethink what we were doing. But CPS got involved, they took the kids, put them with family, thankfully, and arrested her. Story 25. I was around 15, 16 in high school selling substances. I was doing it to save up money for a car, and in the future, college. There was this one girl I would never sell to because she was pregnant. She was one of those girls that got pregnant with an older dude and he left the picture. She didn't want the baby, but her parents made her keep it. Finally, not long after she gave birth, she was trying to buy some substances. She was in my car and I was giving her, I think, around 2 or 3 pills. That's around $40, $55, and she say, "I'm going to be honest, I don't have money, but I know I have a girlfriend you really love, so I was thinking about giving you my girl." I didn't say anything for a little. I couldn't tell if she was serious. Then after a long pause, I told her to get out of my car. Later in the day, I had my parents call CPS for obvious reasons. I came up with a story that me and the girl were friends and that she was telling me how she would give the girl. I'm not sure, but I think the baby ended up going with a family member and is living a completely normal life. Story 26. I went to this disabled woman's house to bring the goods. It had been a while since I had seen her. I think her son was 13 the last time I had been there, and now he was 15. I asked her how he was doing. She began telling me he had been giving her a lot of trouble, and I couldn't imagine that because he was such a good kid. I wish I could explain the no big deal tone she had when she told me this. Kid's name. Said he has had enough, and that he was going to pass away. I begged him to let me take him to the for example, but he wouldn't, ungrateful crap. I know she saw the look of horror on my face. I told her I wanted to go say and went to talk with him. He told me she had a new boyfriend and all they do is drink, use, and fight. He said he wanted to live with his dad, but he had a new family. I told him about telling someone at school about it, and he didn't want his mom to be in trouble. As an adult, my dad had put me on 72-hour holds in the crazy house several times. I told him how a 72-hour hold could give him time to think about what to do next. Have 3 meals a day and someone to talk to. I know that's not great advice, but I was still using at the time and wasn't my best self. So I ended up getting in a fight with her before I left. My son was a little younger than hers, and I couldn't imagine telling that story the way she did. I waited a week and called CPS, hoping she wouldn't know it was me. She did. Nothing ever came of it, and I still think about that boy all the time. Story 27. This was over 20 years ago, but yeah, I was selling weed, sometimes a few other things, but I was pretty minor. Messed around with a girl who I had just started buying from me. Went to sleep, and the next morning, around 10, I get up to this little 3 years old running around. Okay, fine, she's a kid, but you'd imagine a diaper would get on her ass by 10:30, right? Nah. I left at 1 with the baby running all over the house. The mom and her BF in the living room passed out on what I now know was met and wouldn't move at all. Girl I had hung out with thought the whole thing was normal. I couldn't shake, it's that she was filthy. Nobody was taking care of her other than to make sure she had food. I guess maybe she was potty trained already. It's not like the house was filled with lakes of piss. Called and reported it to CPS the same day. She called me a day or two later telling me she was pregnant and needed to come stay with me. That's not how that crap works. Never heard from her again. I hope that many had a good life. Story 28. Back in the early 90s when I was doing paper drops for the area paper boys while I worked for the local newspaper, I had a side gig and a few stops in between where I dropped off other things for a mystery employer. Anyway, one day as I stopped to deliver a bundle to a customer, I could hear someone yelling, "Maybe next time you won't run through the housed." And I could hear a child screaming, and then a door slammed and it got faint. As I got inside, the guy I handed off to tells me, "Look out for the rope, don't trip." And I look down and see a rope stretched across the hallway, right before the 4 tiled steps that lead to the tiled kitchen below. And I noticed drops and drizzles of fresh red liquid, so I asked, knowing it was from the child, but not wanting to call him on it, "Looks like your wife may have missed a step. Is she okay?" And he outright says with a proud grin. That's from the kid's face. He doesn't want to listen and keeps running through the house, so I set that rope up right there and he learned the hard way to listen. He doesn't respond to the belt or the back of my hand. His eyes rolled back. Even that don't faze him. At this point, I'm well aware that one of the bundles I have in the van is a ceramic firearm with a box of metal-free shells, and I was about to go get it and tie this guy up with that rope bare ass and hand his kid the hot spoon and put a chair by the stove so the kid can warm it up as needed. But I knew it would be my end too, so I skipped out on a couple bundle drops and headed back to the dispatch office. Pre-cell phone days, mind you. I called the police, fully expecting them to ask me what I was doing keeping company with this idiot, and then left to deliver the late newspapers. When I got back, the office out front was lined with police cars and a CPS worker took a statement. I lied and said he flagged me down to ask about paper routes for adults. The child had bruises everywhere. Turns out the family had a daughter, who they reported as a 12-year-old runaway just a year before. I hope that's true, but I have darker suspicions. They went to prison 520 wires under multiple weapons, substances, 25 wires federal for possession of stolen military device, and 3 IRs for child abuse and endangerment. As far as I know, the daughter was never located. Yeah, that's not a misprint. Only 3 years for the kid and 25 for stolen military device. That incident sealed my anarchist ideals permanently. Story 29. When I was a young teenager, my best friend, at the time, had an older sister who sold substances. She'd give us rides to places in her car, and sometimes would make a drop-off or meet someone along the way. Wasn't too keen on being in the vehicle during these times, but she was kind of idiot and had a bad temper, so we never questioned her or said anything, and plus we were just young and kind of dumb. I remember one lady she'd see often, and this lady was the most stereotypical addict. Skinny as a rake, jittery, twitchy, insane. She spent all day with other addicts in random sketchy areas of the city or crack houses. One time, friend's older sister pulled up to meet her, and she was hanging out under a bridge with a bunch of other crazies. And there was a big garbage bin on fire that they were hanging out around because it was winter and freezing out. She came up to the window, and a young boy followed her. He must have been 9 or 10. He looked pale and thin, bags under his eyes and not wearing proper winter clothes. He didn't say anything, but the lady started rambling about how the only time he gets excited or happy is when he knows Vicky is coming. Vicky was my friend's sister's alias. The lady went on about how he loves Vicky and says she's so pretty and wants to be like her and have a vehicle like hers and all this. Vicky literally said nothing, just handed her the stuff, got the money, which included a coffee can full of coins, and drove off. My friend asked her sister who the little boy was, and she coldly just said he was the woman's kid. My friend has a good conscience and is not like her sister at all. I remember her looking back at me from the front seat with a horrified look on her face when she heard that poor kid was the addict's son, and he was out there hanging out with all these addicts while they were high out of their tree. Older sis also mentioned that the kid spends all day picking up cigarette butts because he was addicted to smoking. Me and my friend talked about it later and how it bothered us and how it was ducked up that her sister gave no ducks about it, but such is usually the attitude dealers. She cared about money only. My friend said she was going to put in an anonymous tip to police or social services, but didn't want to go personally or be identified to protect her sister. She did, and we saw the lady a few times again but didn't see the little boy, but couldn't be sure if he had been taken by SOPs or just wasn't around. Imagine a child's biggest excitement being when his mom's dealer stops by who doesn't even acknowledge him. Story 30. I was selling a variety of substances a few years ago. I had one friend, let's call him Chris. He stayed at his head uncle's house with his uncle. His name's Rick. Damn him, I'll use his real name. His cousin and his cousin's kids, around 4-6. I hated going to this house because all they did was cook med inside. Literally feet away from these children. These kids lacked clothes. They barely ate. I'm pretty sure they were never enrolled in school either. Well, eventually I get fed up and decide to make a call to CPS. They go in and what they found was horrifying. The Uncle Rick had a hard drive with thousands of CP, When I found this out, I was absolutely appalled. He's in jail, and honestly, I hope he doesn't make it. Story 31. Have used, sold, and middlemanned weed for a long time when money is tight. The only time I've called CPS was when this chick who was a regular for Met asked me to deliver a ball to her house. I walk in, kid is asking for food. I think nothing of it. 4 hours later, she calls me asking for Met. I go back to do it, kid is ornery and still asking for food. 6, 7 years old. 3 hours later at 8 a.m., she calls me asking for another substances. I go back to do it. She always paid eventually. And kid is worse off, still hungry, and now crying. At that point, I refuse the front, go home, and call CPS. I want my profit, but not when I can tell you're ruining your life. If I see people getting out of hand, asking for fronts, neglecting kids, bills, etc., I tell them I'm dry or I drop contact entirely. I'm doing what I need to provide for me and my own, not trying to ruin someone else's life. Story 32. We had a person, we will call her Carrie. She would party with us for days on end. I mean, doing everything and everyone. One night, my homie said we got to take her home because her sister might call her in as a missing person, and we didn't want to have her send the cops over to where we were clerking. When we got to Denny's Apt, we found out for the first time that she had a kid at home. Now, let me first tell you, this T-Roy wasn't the kind of dude that would cry. The house was the nastiest thing I had seen. Yeah, it was Watts, cab, but damn. The room the kid was in had no furniture, and the door was blocked with plywood about 3 feet high, and the baby girl was left in there, crawling on the doo-doo stained floor. The kid was crawling through its own piss and crap like a dog. The place smelled worse than the Met House in the valley we went to. T-Roy was yelling at Carrie, who flopped down drunk on her filthy couch. They didn't have electricity, only an extension cord from next door to power the fridge and a desk lamp. T-Roy, who was not a snitch type on the way home, threw his gun down on the counter at my place and was mad that we didn't just take the kid with us. She rang someone's pager trying to get a fix. She was told she could pick up from us anymore. T-Roy was trying to get someone to call CPS to pick up the kid. No one wanted to do that. Carrie was blowing up someone's pager because she was going those substances and all of that. Didn't hear from her till we saw that she and her kid passed away. Story 33. I used to sell a smorgasbord of substances, mainly H. Been clean since 2014. Went to drop off to an acquaintance who phoned me. New location, so I went in with caution. Trash and scum everywhere. Smell was damn foul. Kids running around crap I had seen before until I focused on the aquarium. It was full of used needles. Some capped, some not. I mean, this was a 55-gallon tank with no lid, and it was over halfway full. Called CPS next day. I'll never forget that. Story 34. I once called animal services on one of my best customers. He had 4 dogs all in cages locked up all day in a hot studio apartment. Had to do it. And I'm not even an animal or dog lover, just felt sorry for them. Story 35. Coming from a child of former addicts. I want to say thank you to all these people. I'm 34 now and grew up in Met House and other people's homes. My father died when I was 15, and my mother got worse. It was trailer parks and roaming the streets for me and my little brother. I had to be the mom back then. I kept the house clean as best I could, skipped school to guard wherever we were staying that day, and so on. CPS never got involved because no one would speak up. Story 36. I was delivering large amounts of weed at 16, 18. Had met a new client referred to me by a friend at the time. I always made it a point to come inside and scale out. I hate parking lot meets. They're unnecessary. This guy insisted on meeting in his apartment parking lot every time. I let it slide because he would purchase at least a quarter pound every time. In hindsight, that was dumb. The 5th or 6th time we meet, he finally invites me in. He had 2 boys, 1 infant, and 1 toddler, no more than 4 years old. There was a woman strung out at 2 p.m. on the couch, couple boxes of nasal Narcan next to some cookers on a coffee table. One of the boxes was opened. Each of those boxes have 2 doses. One had already been used. The toddler was just running around the 500-600 scuffed apartment playing, and the guy would threaten him to settle down. There was nothing but stacked boxes in a couple corners, an air mattress for the toddler, a crib in another corner, a couch, coffee table, and a foldable chair, and a carpet had massive charred, burned areas. The guy catches my glances and tells me irritated, "It's fine, they're familiar with all of this. Just scale the bud." I asked him, "You sure?" He looked at me like I was a hole. So I scaled his bud. Meanwhile, his kid started acting up again and he said sternly, "I swear." He settled down immediately with a look of shameful terror. I understand that being a parent, it's difficult to make ends meet. I didn't want to interfere with his life. It wasn't my place. But when I left, I closed the door and immediately heard from the other side, "Next time, if you don't stay in your room when I have company, I'll beat your mother, you hear me?" I got in my car, parked down the street, and called the Texas Abuse Hotline. I don't know what happened to any of them after that. Haven't thought about that for years. I just hope that they're all doing better. I hope I didn't just ruin several people's lives. Story 37. I wasn't a dealer, but a user back in the day. Clean for 10 plus years now. Quit as soon as I got pregnant with my oldest. But I went to the person's house with a couple friends, and when they answered the door, the girl was dressed in a cheap maid's lingerie outfit, like 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And the other girl wasn't much better. They had 4 or 5 kids in the house that I saw upon entering. They were probably 3, 8 years old and filthy. Just damn. They screamed at the kids to go play in the room, and we all sat in the living room. I was ready to leave at this point. My friend was selling them some weed, so he was dealing with that. I heard crying coming from the back room. Newborn crying, and everyone ignored it for a good 10 minutes, until my friend told the woman to go get her damn baby. So she comes out with this 2-month-old who is filthy, in a dirty diaper, and I think she made him a bottle, but I'm not even sure. She held him for like 5 mins and then went and put him back in the back room where he cried continuously. It was seriously heartbreaking. The guy I was with started berating her for not dealing with her kid, and we left. I made a report right after that. Between the neglect of the newborn and older kids, state of the house, and physically watching these moms not give 2 craps, it was too much. Story 38. Mine is actually reverse buyer calling on dealer. This was about a decade ago, and I was addicted. I used to buy from this woman who had really good crap at very low cost. I bought from her for about a year and literally watched her transform from a semi-habitual user to a full addict. Right before I called on her, she got robbed and was trying to make up her money by selling makeup that looked like substances. It's a good thing I had the common sense to not try it. God only knows what would have happened if I used that. Anyway, after that, I got super pissed and went to her house. She used to always meet me in the backyard, so I never went in before. Well, when I barged in, I found she had a toddler. Never made any mention of a kid. This kid looked like he had been rolling around in dirt for the last 3 months without ever taking a shower. Looked like he hadn't eaten in a month. The house was filthy, stains everywhere, torn up, disgusting clothes all over the place, a rank smell coming from the kitchen, etc., etc. It was literally like that episode of Breaking Bad where Jesse goes to the addict house to get his money back and finds the kid. I saw the kid, saw the house, and walked right out to call CPS. Somehow he ended back up with her after a few weeks. But a month or so after that, she was caught with some guy she knew, using counterfeit money all over town. Feds raided the place. She got a nice long sentence, and the kid lives with a relative from what I heard. As bad of an addict as I was, I truly don't understand how anyone could be so bad as to not only live like that, but to neglect an innocent child so badly. Story 39? Yes. Like 6 years ago, I sold Met one time for like a month. Sold to a co-worker who had 2 kids, but only had custody of 1. I went to her apartment and it was a mess. Trash everywhere. Met pipes just laying around on her living room table, which was covered in cigarette butts and empty baggies. Her kid was just walking around the living room, not even wearing a diaper. Apartment smelled like cigarettes, weed, and piss. She wanted to buy $1,000 worth of substances from me, but only had $500 cash. So she ended up adding a brand new 55-inch TV and wall mount. After she used rubbing alcohol to rub off the name and address of the rent-to-own place she had just got the TV from a few days before. After leaving, I told my then-pregnant wife about it, and she called CPS. She lost custody of her kid, and her sister, who was actually the nurse we saw at all our baby appointments, got custody of him. She also has custody of her other child as well. Last I heard, she went to jail for trying to run her boyfriend off the highway. Story 40. Probably about a decade ago, now I used to sell weed to this one couple in town. They seemed like de-assing enough people until I found out woman was pregnant and still use. I stopped ducking with them for a long time and one day get a call. She just had the baby and said she was having a party to celebrate. She was going to have weed and alcohol. I was like, "You got a babysitter?" To which she said, "Nah, we're just going to leave her in the room." There was going to be like 40 people all ducked up and tripping while she just locked her newborn in the room. Needless to say, I'm like mentally ducking, screaming at this point, but keep my composure. I'm like, "You already got everything?" "No, I was going to see if I could have you front me some weed. I already got everything else." "Bet." "What time?" She tells me the time and I hang up. Told my wife about it and asked her what to do. We called Sis and told them what time the party was supposed to be and what their plan was. Turned out by the time they got there, the couple was already passed out. There was way more people in hard substances as well. People were knotted out in the baby's room. Last I heard, the couple lost the baby and never got it back. Story 41. Yes, one time I served this woman an 8-ball and I saw the condition her kids were in and lived in, and I've been through that, so I couldn't stand watching them go through it. So I called CPS, and the children are now living with their grandparents, who are very nice people, and the kids are now both in university. Story 42. Yeah, man, selling crap makes you like reassess your life of character sometimes. Moved Met for a bit. Money is wicked, but then you realize who is doing it. Your homies that are parents or are married or both, and you realize all the problems you hear about with them ended up being related to the crap you have been selling. Girls you thought were solid will ditch their man. It's bad enough that she would do that to a random, but they will do that knowing that her man is your good friend. One time I did have to call CPS on a friend he called me. He was at his new girlfriend's place. I'd never met her. I get there and the house is overflowing from smoke and he tells me to come in. As I'm walking in, I'm like, damn bro, what the heck is all this smoke from? He says, smokes? So I obviously was like, yo, what the heck? Because now I am breathing this crap. And as I'm telling him to duck off and that I'm not going to chill and breath this, I hear a baby crying and lose it. Left immediately and called CPS. My buddy took off, she got arrested. I don't talk to him anymore. Somehow they thought that crap was okay. Story 43. I'm kind of sitting on a situation myself. My sister-in-law lives with my mother-in-law and my 2 nephews. The nephew's mom is a paranoid schizophrenic and she lives on the streets by she trusts no one. And the kids, dad doesn't want them. So my sister-in-law raises them. My mother-in-law is like 74 and is going through chemo and radiation. So the SIS-in-law has like 12 cats, maybe more, and they have a few dogs. When I went into the house recently with my husband, I almost fainted from the smell. The ammonia was overwhelming. There was cat feces and puddles of piss all over the house, even in the kids' room. I grabbed the kids and took them to our house. Their overnight bag had a layer of cat piss that was like gel. I had to make them strip and wash their clothes and bag 3 times to get the smell out. Now, I can't keep them forever. I have 3 kids of my own, and my oldest has autism. We have only 3 bedrooms. So I want to call CPS. We are in Texas, but I don't want to cause any type of issues with the family. So I don't know what to do. I thought to report anonymously. I know that living in a cloud of cat piss and piles of feces isn't good for you. Story 44. In Britain, we have social services. Now we're talking the mid-90s during the rave scene. I was a doorman working some really dodgy clubs, you proper dens of girls, and every now and then we'd catch an idiot that weren't supposed to be dealing and confiscated their pills and cash. My boss got the dough, but we split the ease. So I get told to go down the sticks to look after this warehouse rave. Not so much stopping the punters knocking out of each other, but stop a chance robbing the door money. 20 quid on the door, about 2,500 people and off their tits. Crap. I was tempted to do the place myself. Anyway, while I was there, this bird came up to us and asked us, the bouncers, to watch her car. We thought nothing of it until about 3 in the morning when me-mate spots a little kid staring out the window. This woman had gone raving with her kids. Needless to say, we took the kids into the warm, made sure they were fed and watered, and called the bill. Obviously, the social services got involved from that. The rave finished at noon Sunday, and my shift ended at 5 a.m., so I couldn't tell you what happened, but I hope those kids went to someone that actually gives a crap. Story 45. My brother-in-law's dealer recently pulled out of the game. He was dropping off some weed or something like that, and the woman who was buying offered her 3 children as payment instead. Not 1, all 3. He told my bill, my husband and I, that they couldn't be over 10. This guy tore her a new one and called the cops. He's not her only dealer, and it ducked with him to know that someone else could have taken her up on the offer. He's been chilling for now, trying to keep to himself after that. He's been smoking and slowly liquidating everything else. He only sold mild substances and weed, and this woman was willingly selling all of she has get her fix. Not sure how he's not in trouble for dealing to her, but he claims he had only weed on his person when it went down. Story 46. I made a play one day, and this woman and her husband were meeting me. I pulled up to the spot, and they were out of their vehicle yelling. They pointed at my car, and I just drove around the store. You know of that. The woman and 1 child came to my car after going around the building, so I let them in and drove off. Well, people had already been calling the cops, and the husband called and reported the daughter missing. Crazy crap for like a 5-minute period. So I took them 10 minutes from said pharmacy to their house, and the whole time the mom was shut talking. The dad and the daughter was just sitting there wide-eyed but calm. I can still remember her face, her parents just fighting and acting belligerent. Although I only sold weed, the parents were apparently on meth. I found out later. I decided after the ladies were home to call 911 and report an endangered child. I didn't call CPS per se, but I did call police who were happy to locate the daughter. And eventually she was taken to a family who were not addicted. I'll never forget that girl's face and name. I hope she's okay today. Story 47. So I sold weed and pills at 13 and would deliver around my town and the neighboring town. I had to go to the neighboring town and drop off some weed, which would cost them roughly $350, which isn't a bad price for the best weed in a 100-mile radius. So I'm biking to the address, which took an hour. So I went to the back door and knocked 4 times. He opened the door while beating his kid. I'm very against beating your kids. Physical punishment is okay, but he didn't stop after me standing there for 15 minutes. So I charged him $700. He bought it anyway. So I rode home and called CPS and gave them the address and some information about him having pills and weed in little translucent baggies. He's been in jail for a few years now. Story 48. Slightly different. My bio dad was the dealer, bio mom, the client. I believe they were together for a short while. Not sure what happened there, but by the time I was 2, bio mom was with someone else, and bio dad wasn't exactly in the picture. She had abandoned me numerous times during those 2 years, a total of about 7.5 months. During the time she had me, still on substances, and new boyfriend was abusive towards her. Unsure of towards me, but they were sure I'd at least witnessed. I don't know what the motivating factor was, but one night bio dad called CPS, and I was taken away immediately and placed with a foster family. I got tested, no emotional attachments to either parent, and they later denied bio mom rights to contact me till I turned 18. Original foster family later adopted me. As far as I know, he's still a dealer and in and out of jail, and she's turned her life around and is doing good. Story 49. At a friend's house at the time, and they offered me their daughter for a few 80s. Dishes piled everywhere smelled like cat piss and dog crap, animals everywhere. The downstairs bathroom was used by 2 damn ferrets who just crap all over the floor. Fly strips on the ceiling just caked. I'm serious. Left, went back home, asked her father, who I knew before this, what I should do. We both ended up leaving tips with CPS, and as far as I know, the kid is gone, and not soon after the house burnt down on accident, only the second home to do so in like 7 years. I have no idea where the parents are, out of state somewhere. I'm thinking Ohio, and I'm going to school here in 2 weeks. Story 50. I live in Kentucky. My ex-wife was a meth cook and dealer. I spent 3 years fighting the state to get custody of my sons. She failed every substance test and was able to keep my boys. That was until she was busted for manufacturing meth. It was at that time the Commonwealth of Kentucky decided I was correct and she was a bad parent. I had called CPS several times, but they kept letting her skip through the cracks of the system. Story 51. More of an unwitting mule than a dealer, but every Uber driver has been accessory to at least one substance deal. You can be damn sure I call CPS and the cops whenever either party has a baby. Story 52. 20 plus years ago, when I was in that world of substances, I reported this woman who was running a daycare out of her house and using meth. I just could not let it go.